maybe we give everyone a couple more minutes, and while we're letting folks join the meeting, take some time to give us your thoughts on what this task force meeting should be talking about going forward. We are going to have 4 meetings in the calendar year of 2024, quarterly meetings, as we did last year, and likely in the years to come. So feel free to send us ideas. There are no bad ideas, and you guys are working out there in our region, so you know what the issues are, and so we'd like to hear them. All right, so we've got quite a few folks who've joined. Sean, Sydney, are y'all ready to go? Jack, are you able to hear me and ready to present in a little bit?
Okay.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
And
and you guys will flip the slides then, right?
Yes, sir. And I will cue you. We got just a few intro slides, and then we'll get to your local update.
Okay.
Great.
I'll try to get it done in time, unlike Revolution.
Really unlike so many meetings that seem to have a time limit. Okay, well, Sydney, do we want to show our Mentimeter results now, or do we? Or it's a word cloud, isn't it? So it's kind of difficult to show.
Yeah, it might be better to send that out after or something.
We'll send that out after, and when you're looking for that email, if you want to email us even more ideas, that's also a great time. So, look for those results and let us know what's going on there in the region. Okay, I'm Travis Liska. I'm a principal transportation planner here at the North Central Texas Council of Governments on our land use transportation task force. I lead it with Sean, Conrad, Sydney, and others at our agency. So this is our first meeting of 2024. Welcome, everyone. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're joining us. As I said earlier, we're going to have these meetings quarterly throughout the calendar year. Here you can see our quarterly dates. Topics are to be determined. And again, we welcome your input on that. All the content from this task force meeting, it will be available on our website. You see there, nctcog.org/land use transportation task force. And you can also find a copy of this schedule for your convenience there. So if we go on to our next slide, what we're going to talk about today, we decided to kick off with a discussion of how local governments can best work with us as an MPO, because that is what we are here to do, is to support you all. We can't implement coordinated land use transportation without local governments being at least half of the equation or more. So we're going to talk about some best practices, tips, tricks, how things work, and hopefully equip you all to best leverage the federal funding opportunities, which have been coming very rapidly in the last couple of years. But first, as we do with every land use transportation task force meeting, we like to have a local update. And fortunately, Jack has agreed to share some info with us. So Sydney, what's our next slide? And now I'll turn it over to Jack to tell us about really what is a many years in the making effort for DART to coordinate with many of you all and at the cities who are DART members on coordinating with transit-oriented development, one of the key land use transportation coordination elements. So Jack, when you're ready, Sydney will be flipping the slides.
Okay, go right at it. The first slide is overview of the DART service area for those of you who aren't aware. I'm sure most, if not all of you are. But just in case, DART is a 700 square mile service area made up of 13 member cities that support us with 1 cent sales tax for operations. Within our service area right now, the light rail system, you've all heard, is 92 miles. We have about 65 stations, and of those, our estimate is 49 of them have potential to be transit-oriented development projects. And all of our member cities have taken this to heart. They've all focused on, to one degree or another, on future development, not just around the rail stations, but also at the rail stations. And because of that, DART has looked at its property, and I'll get into a little more details later, and particularly our parking lots for future development. Next slide. DART has a TOD policy, which was the first policy was done in 1989. It's been updated a few times as recently as 2019, right before COVID. And the thing we really focused on the last update was partnerships, and transit-oriented development is really all about partnerships, not just with the developers, but also with our member cities. Particularly since, as many of you know, the cities have the tools, financial tools, to exercise a lot of the incentives that the developers are looking for, such as DART does not have TIF districts. We don't participate in them since we're a non-taxable authority. So it's really up to the cities, and they've got many other programs that are benefits to transit-oriented development projects, and we're working on several now, which I'll get into a little bit. So the other, besides partnerships, is what we recognized was reallocating surface parking spaces. Right now, DART has approximately 22,000 spaces in its system, and all of its both rail stations and bus transit centers. Of those 22,000 spaces before COVID, we were parking only about 48% of them. After COVID, it's now about 10%. So we've had a massive drop in parking utilization. I'm anticipating that we will slowly grow back some of those to hopefully get close to pre-COVID numbers, but still, even with the pre-COVID numbers, there is a lot of underutilized parking. And so that's a great opportunity for housing and employment centers, i.e. transit-oriented development at the stations. Next slide. So we've got, as Travis mentioned, we have developed some agreements over the years. The first and the simplest is what we've done, DART has done on its own, and Mockingbird Station, Trinity Mills are two prime examples of that, where we've worked with a master developer, gone through a selection process, an RFP process. In the case of Trinity Mills, we partnered with the city of Carrollton. Mockingbird Station we did on our own. We'd done some other sites before that, but weren't so successful in them. They're now moving forward, but working with the cities, and the cities saw how long this process takes. And we'd worked with them in the past doing MOUs where the city would do transit plans and help for guidance on some of the development potential. But what they wanted was a little more flexibility in terms of the process of selecting developers. And so in the case of Richardson and Addison, they came to us with a proposal back in 2017-18. And the idea was that since they were in the process of doing transit-oriented development plans, they would like to take the lead, and they proposed that we went through the legality of it and found a way that we could do this, whereas the city could lease the land directly from DART. Then DART, as part of the process of selection, would be included in the the TOD process. However, the city would lead that process, and they would make a selection of a developer along with us. And then once a selection was made, they would sublease the property to the developer. That was the overall concept. And a way to implement that was we developed an interlocal agreement with each of those cities. And we're in the process of doing more of them now. We still do the MOU process because in the case of like the city of Dallas, and we've worked with Garland on it, where they haven't had TOD plans already. And when we review a development, our board likes to see an existing TOD plan to be attached with it. That is a concept that can be tied to the development proposal. So this is a way of, if there is no plan, we do an MOU with the member city. If there is a plan that the city has done and has approved and they have zoning in place, then we can jump to an interlocal agreement process. And that then, as part of the lease agreement, will spell out the lease terms so everybody knows up front what they will be as part of that. Next slide. So the benefit of MOU, just a little background, is it for us creates an understanding between the city and DART to identify the TOD goals, make sure we're all on the same page and the big picture of the long range plan. Also, it formalizes the relationship between both parties. We've generally put in there what each party will do. And I think we'd like to be able to put in at some point what, a timeline of when it will be done. But I tell you, these projects and the experience of everyone so far has been these things take a lot longer than anybody anticipates. And then finally, benefit of an MOU is it's non-binding. So we, particularly from the DART side, we can enter into an MOU administratively, whereas an ILA has to go to the board to be approved because it's a legally binding agreement. Next slide. The first MOUs we did really for TOD were with the city of Garland. Nathaniel Barnett came to me quite a few years ago, and we discussed and in this case, the underutilized bus transit centers. South Garland Transit Center, Lake Ray Hubbard, and then downtown Garland had been a transit center, but it became a station. But all of these, including the stations, were underparked, as I noted earlier. And we've had visual representations here. These are what the parking spaces that are on the sites are listed underneath the aerials. But then off to the side, I've got what the parking was before COVID, and it's even gotten less now. So what we're doing is looking, we've got two projects moving forward. We're actually, we are reviewing the draft ILA with the city of Garland right now for Lake Ray Hubbard Transit Center. There's a development ongoing next door, which is a mixed use development by Anthem Development on a 15-acre piece of property. And that spurred the city's interest in asking us if we'd be willing to redevelop on our property. And really, when you go back, you look at the underutilized parking and also a lot of the open space that's around there. These were acquired back in the day when this was sort of out there. And so the land was available, so we went ahead and got it. And now all we're doing is mowing a lot of grass. So the idea is to better utilize this and create livable communities around it. So these were some real good examples, and I think the board took them to heart. And this is going on throughout the system with a lot of our station areas. Next slide. So this is an example of Lake Ray Hubbard station area. The concept number 2, which was the preferred concept by the city, was part of a transit-oriented development planning effort that they took on, went through the process, and they rezoned the process to support transit-oriented development. The DART property in the lower left, you can see the Walmart property, which is now being developed on, and then the DART property, which we will go out with an RFP on. One thing I just need to make sure everybody's aware of, that when a public agency like DART goes out with these properties, we are required to go out for solicitation by both local government code and by FTA when there's FTA money involved. So even though there's a developer next door, there's no rights of his for development on the DART property. He has to compete like anybody else as part of a solicitation process. Next slide. So the last process we're going through is the city of Dallas, and we talked off and on with the city about making some of the DART properties available, because we have so many stations within the city of Dallas. And as part of their affordable housing efforts and their some of their actions that we're moving forward on setting goals for affordable housing, they asked us, and we worked with them to develop 5 or 6 sites. It became 5. One dropped out at the last minute, but we identified 6 DART properties we thought had a lot of potential for development, and that could be approached fairly quickly by the development community. So we went through, we developed an MOU, which spells out that the city would lead the RFP process, DART would participate in it. We participated in the selection process. Just a year ago, we selected 6 development teams for each of the properties. However, I noted one of them dropped out. So there are 5 now. We've got 5 stations that we're working at on the parking lots there. City Council approved those development teams last summer. City staff, economic development staff, has led the way in this and partnered with planning and housing. And so we've just been in the process of meeting with the development teams. I think we've had our 2nd round of meetings with them. We're talking about the financing. As I said, the financial terms and incentives are a very important foundation to these projects, and that's why it's so necessary for the city to be working in partnership with us on it, because without that, DART has no legal means of providing incentives to properties. So the plan is that as we move forward, that it'll probably be another 1.5 years before everything is finalized. We will, as part of the MOU, once we get the financial plan sort of figured out, we will then finalize everything in an interlocal agreement, again, where we will lease the property to the city, who will then sublease to the developer or some form of fashion of that. There are some intricacies that we still have yet to work out with these. So, and again, this is a fairly new process. This whole ILA concept was approved by our board for the first time June 21st of 2021. So it was just happened, right when COVID was going on, we developed this. So next slide. These are the 6 sites: Lake June, Butner, Westmoreland, Hampton, 8th and Corinth. And 8th and Corinth is the property that dropped out. The council member felt it was a little premature, I think, for moving forward on that project. So it'll probably come in a future time. And then Royal Lane on the green line. And I've got some slides here of each one individually. Next. So this is Buckner Station. We looked at, you'll see in the aerial, there's a green space there. We'd always reserve that for some sort of small TOD type concept. But again, parking was very underutilized here. It's the end of the line. We felt it had a lot of good potential and good access for transit oriented development. Next slide. Should be Lake June. Lake June also, and again on these, besides the open parking, a lot of them, you'll see a lot of open green space. And this is right in a residential area, so we think this will be a real prime spot for mixed use transit oriented development, but primarily residential is what we're looking for. And all of these will have a element of affordable housing as part of it. And Lake June, we may even do a small portion of the property would be for sale for townhouses. That's an exception that we can make if the project supports it. Next slide. Hampton Station on the red line, just down from Westmoreland Station. This has been an underutilized station. About maybe a third on a good day of the parking lot was being used. And again, it's right up next to a single family community. So the idea is to do a transit-oriented development that's closer to the road and the station. And one thing, what we're really looking for in all these projects is to integrate the DART facilities in with the project. We don't want it to be sort of one half of the site being a multifamily development and the other side of the site being DART. We really want it to be integrated, walkable, active space. You hear what we talk about a lot these days are fantastic spaces. We're really trying to provide the amenities, and through these projects, whether it be just a park-like area or daycare or retail, these are the things we're looking at to include in these, but also in a way that it really assimilates the DART facilities along with it. However, they still have to accommodate the DART operations, the buses and the trains. Next slide. And Westmoreland Station, this is at the end of the line. There's plenty of parking here. And this is also proposed for a mixed use development, multifamily. More than likely a daycare or a training center would go in close to the station area. We were just talking to this developer this morning. So a lot of real good projects have come out about from this process. So and I think, is that the last one or is there one more? Oh, Royal Lane, I couldn't forget that. Royal Lane is out on the green line. The site is very underused. There's only about 30 parking spaces a day being used there. In this one, the project that's developed is proposed. I think they're including a daycare also. They're looking to have sort of an open face type C arrangement that faces into the station area around the perimeter of the parking lot. All the buses would stay where they're at, but this would be a 3-story, and I think one of the ideas was a lot of 3-bedroom units as part of this. So again, these are all projects that we're real excited to see. They all have a lot of potential, and now we're working through the details, and hopefully we'll be seeing something come out of the ground in another year and a half. And I think that's it now. Well, it's not it.
I think you got a few more.
Yeah, I did talk. I wanted to put in some extra. I did this at the last minute. I wanted to throw in these slides about the interlocal agreements, just because it's a new concept, and I didn't want anybody to misconstrue anything that I may have said. But it commits each city to reflect the transit-oriented development guidelines that DART has, as well as our policy and the city plans. And again, the importance and the difference between an MOU and the interlocal agreement is that it reflects a well-developed TOD plan already. And again, if you work with us in the future and haven't done it in the past, when we take a project to the board, we like to have a very good worked out, thought out concept. So when the board sees it, they can have an idea of what's going to happen, and not just say, trust us, it'll get done. They like to see the specificity, and we do too. And then lease requirements are defined securing economic rent and market rates obligations. For properties, DART is required to get fair market value for its properties, and a lot of developers raise their eyes at that. They think we're a public agency, so we ought to be giving away property. And unfortunately, that's not the case. DART's required by FTA and by local government code to get fair market value for its property. Next slide. So each city initiates a request for proposal process, and that's part of the ILA. The cities each have 24 months to complete that process, and a 12-month extension if needed. We're having gone what we've just gone through, we are relooking at some of these deadlines, because what looks like more than enough time when you're developing the agreements, by the time everything gets finalized and you're moving forward, next thing you know, the time's up. So, and you're in getting it amended again. So we're relooking at that. And the latest was that really brought that to the fore was with Richardson, we amended theirs and the town of Addison's to give them more time to execute a lease on the property. And next slide. These are the two ILAs that we've done, and I've mentioned earlier, is Addison, and it's a 9-acre property that DART owns. It's an existing transit center. The idea is the transit center would remain there. It would be rebuilt by the developer, more than likely as the ground floor of the project, and then they would build above it. And then we have an older building next door to it, which is known as the Bowman Building, which would be torn down and rebuilt. The initial concept is probably a boutique hotel or something like that. But the way markets are today, I don't really pin anything on anything right now. We'll see how things evolve in the next couple of years. And then next slide. It should be Richardson, and this is Arapahoe Center. Again, in the upper right-hand corner is the TOD plan that was developed for it. DART has an old transit center at the site that's underutilized. When the rail line opened up on the red line next door to as many of you may recall, this used to be a transit center before it became a rail station. The bus facility reduced the number of bus bays that we needed, so we didn't need as many bus bays. And parking always has been sort of capped at around 400 here, and we've got 1,200 spaces. So there's a lot of land to develop. The city used this as sort of the centroid of their innovation district concept that they had worked on as part of the TOD planning process. And so we'll be working with them. Their plan is to go out hopefully this spring with a new RFP for this project, which would redevelop the entirety of the 14 acres. And with that, I think that was the last slide. And I was right finally.
Thanks, Jack.
Okay.
Yeah, appreciate. There's a lot in your presentation that I hope folks were paying attention to, because it's kind of a case study in public-private partnerships, and there's a lot that you guys had to work through. You know, as you mentioned, the local government code on disposal of public property is always something to keep in mind, not just the FTA stuff. So everybody at the meeting, wherever they have projects, that's going to apply, and it's going to be really exciting to see these projects move forward. I know it's some of them are challenging, but they're really, it's an exercise in catalytic development for a lot of these station areas.
I think everybody, when they get into these, including me, thinks, so this will be a fast process. And then once you get into it and you realize all the steps involved, all the intricacies and all the alternative scenarios you can go through, just in getting an agreement finalized, it really does take some time and takes a lot of diligence. So, but it's worth it in the end.
Absolutely. I think this is going to be a huge game changer with our transit systems. So Jack, if you hang out and folks have
Yeah,
questions, they
yeah.
can toss
Yep.
them in the chat, or if you need a follow up with Jack, we can connect everyone. All right, well, Sean, are we ready to jump into our main topic? And I should say,
Yep.
before we move on, that was an example, everyone, of a local update of something, a specific implementation. So if you've got something you want to share on a project that maybe doesn't fit within our topic of the day, feel free to let us know. Or we may be reaching out to you as well if we see local governments doing interesting projects. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sean.
All right, thanks, Travis. I'm going to do kind of a quick overview, set the stage, context type of talk here, just to discuss with you local government and MPO coordination generally, and then we're going to go into our more focused presentations. Next slide, please. So we want to know, what do you want to know about working with COG? Any burning questions, things you always wanted to know but were afraid to ask? Feel free to put those in the chat as we go along here at any time, and that might help us with our discussion as well. We want to hear from you. Next slide, please. So I'm going to kind of start at Adam and Eve here for the benefit of people who may be new to working with COG, or people who have maybe worked with COG before and just maybe are a little fuzzy on how the big picture works. What is the North Central Texas Council of Governments? We are a council of governments, which is a regional coordinating body consisting of representation from local governments within a region. COGs do all sorts of things. They're all things regional. The COG region is 16 counties that you can see in the map there. It's about 12,800 square miles. The primary tasks of the COG are to strengthen individual and collective power of local governments. We, again, do all things regional opportunities. We try to eliminate duplication and have efficiencies, make joint decisions. And at this, COG also assists the local governments with planning for those common needs and cooperating for mutual benefit. So, you know, the end point being, of course, sound regional development. The COG departments, there are multiple departments at COG. You're probably most familiar with the transportation department, but they kind of run the gamut here. You've got aging services, 911, public safety, transportation, of course, is our department that we'll be focusing on here. Next slide, please. So what is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, if that's what a council of governments is? The Metropolitan Planning Organization is federally mandated for any urbanized region over 50,000 in population. And then that the jurisdiction of a MPO is the Metropolitan Planning Area, which is census designated. And in our region is this 12 county area that you can see in the map. So the COG is the 16 counties. It includes the red and the gray counties in the map, and the MPO has the 12 counties. The MPO is governed by the Regional Transportation Council, which is our policymaking advisory board made up of 45 elected officials and representatives from local governments and our transportation providers across the region. Then the Transportation Department is the lead agency for the Metropolitan Planning Organization. The MPO consists of our department and all of the representation that we have throughout the region. The Transportation Department is the lead agency, receives the funding, distributes the funding, conducts regional transportation planning and funding processes. Next slide, please. Just a little overview of the DFW MPO here. It's, again, the 12 counties, MPA. It's about 9,300 square miles, lots of municipalities, lots of school districts. Population has grown from about 2 million to about 8 million in 2022. We have 85 commuter and light rail stations. We have 19 transit member cities. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot to do here. So we all keep busy, and it's great. It's very interesting work, working at the regional level. Next slide, please. Key boards and committees. I'm going to start at the right here. We have the Surface Transportation Technical Committee, which is our technical group that makes recommendations regarding transportation planning and the funding of projects in the region. So makes recommendations on what projects that board thinks should be funded from our various funding sources. It consists of 80 members, and these are technical people, engineers, and technical staff from our different entities. The Regional Transportation Council then is, so the STAC is making recommendations to the Regional Transportation Council, which is our policy body at the MPO. And RTC has the final word in allocation of the federal, state, and regional transportation funds going to the projects, as well as other activities, and consists of local or elected appointed officials from the MPA. And then finally, the executive board, which is really the fiscal and budgetary policy making body for the entire Council of Governments, not just the MPO. This is the fiduciary body, and it approves funds coming in and going out, and consists of 17 locally elected officials. Next slide, please. Then we have a variety of subcommittees. This is 3 of them. We have BPAC, our Bicycle, Pedestrian, and Advisory Committee, which some of you may have been involved in, that provides technical expertise and outreach for local government on items related to bicycle and pedestrian activities, infrastructure, etc. And this has a member appointed by STAC designation. And then we've got our current group here, we're a forum for local governments to highlight best practices around coordinating land use and transportation plans, policies, and projects. We're focused on the interaction between transportation and land use. And then the Regional Safety Advisory Committee, RSAC, which assists in the development of regional safety policies, programs, procedures, and is generally transportation professionals and TxDOT representatives that are participating in that group. And at the bottom of the screen there, you can see a link to other committees. And there's a number of other committees that you might be interested in, and also our meeting calendar that has our committee meeting dates on it. Next slide, please. So we got some key plans and documents here. These are documents that we are federally required to generate. The Metropolitan Transportation Plan is our long-range planning document. And it has the overall themes of mobility, quality of life, system sustainability, and implementation. That's kind of the blueprint for the region's transportation system. The Transportation Improvement Program, which you'll hear more about in a few minutes, is the TIP. So this is our multi-year funding program of approved regional projects. We develop a new TIP every 2 years. The congestion management process is a required process for all COGs that are in areas that are over 200,000 population. And so this is a regional approach for managing congestion. And then our Unified Planning Work Program, which was basically our work plan, our guide for the activities that we as staff and as a COG will be conducting over the course of specific, usually 2 fiscal years. It includes the detailed descriptions of all work tasks and a summary of funding amounts and sources. And then all these documents are available at the link you see there at the bottom of the screen. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit more about the UPWP. This may be of interest to you. So this, as I said, this includes our internal work tasks. It also includes work that COG commits to conduct for outside organizations, and any significant planning funds that are received by our members, and it's updated quarterly. I wanted to talk about this because cities can request technical assistance through a process of our UPWP update. So you can request planning assistance from COG. Emails are sent soliciting these requests every 2 years, and typically in January or February. They go to all the cities in the NPA. Letters go to the mayors, county judges, city managers, county administrators, transportation planning, public works directors, for all the cities and counties in the NPA with population over 5,000, and they also go to our transit agencies. So by responding to this letter, you as an agency can request assistance from COG on planning work We rarely give money direct, so NCT COG completes this work, or we can hire a consultant to complete the work. When we get all of these requests, we look through them, we screen them, we decide which projects we can in fact go forward with, and then we give you all notification of that. So, and we usually are looking for projects or plans that are outside of kind of the things that you all already have to do. And for example, ADA transition plans, that's not really the purview of the things that we're trying to get into here. We're looking for more regionally significant or innovative items or projects, plans that align with RTC's goals for the region. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk a little bit as well about Sustainable Development Program, drilling down a little bit more. So we've got North Central Texas Council of Governments. As the Council of Governments, we have the MPO, that's the Transportation Department, and then the Sustainable Development Team is a team in the Transportation Department, and also the team that hosts this task force. So we have some major program areas. We look at land use and transportation planning, TOD, parking management, bicycle and pedestrian planning, community schools and transportation. We also have a sustainable development funding program that has funded infrastructure planning and land banking projects. And you can see our adopted RTC policy there. We're looking at improving mobility, system capacity, utilizing existing system capacity as much as we can, promoting mixed use. And you can kind of see the sweet spot there in the middle of the Venn diagram is infill mixed use with rail access. And that's something we really like to see in the region. Next slide, please. In general, program activities for sustainable development in all those areas include plan development, infrastructure funding, technical assistance, regional studies, education and training, and then public outreach and encouragement. Next slide. And just to give you an idea, these are some of the recent projects and activities that Sustainable Development has undertaken, kind of run the gamut. We've got a value capture report. We have a public community gardens program guide. We have a parking study for Deep Ellum, routes to rail study, DCTA. So we've got links to all of these. And you'll be getting this presentation afterward. We'll make sure you get those links. Next slide, please. Okay. That's everything I've got. We're ready to delve into the weeds a little bit more.
Indeed. Well, Sean, you covered a lot of ground there. And if anyone on this call didn't exactly know what MPOs were doing, I think you know a little bit more now. All right. Yeah, and like Sean said, if that spurred some questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. But to kind of get into a little bit more of a specific role that I'm pretty sure many of you are interested in is where does the money come from and how does that flow? So with us, we've got Brian Dell, who's been with COG for a while and is probably one of the most expert folks on how that funding is allocated here. So Brian, do you want to tell us a little bit about how our regional governments get funding, which I believe is your role on the Transportation Improvement Programming Team?
Yeah,
or something like that.
Thanks. Yep, thanks, Travis. Like Travis said, I'm Brian Dell. I'm a principal planner. I've been with COG, it'll be 7.5 years, I think. I'm a principal planner on the TIP team. So as he said, we deal with all things transportation funding and project selection. So I'm going to give you a real high-level overview of transportation funding and a couple of opportunities, and give you some tips about how to get plugged in and what to think about as you are trying to find funding, and if you're fortunate enough to receive funding, how you can best implement projects. So next slide, please. So Sean touched on this a little bit, so I won't go into this too much, but it's always interesting, in my opinion, to look at how large our region is. So again, Sean touched on how big we are in population. That makes us the 4th largest metropolitan area in the country. We're larger than 35 states in population, which is pretty wild to think about. And then when we look at land area, we're the second largest planning area in the country and larger than 5 states. And then, as y'all are probably well aware of, we have quite a strong economy here in Dallas-Fort Worth region. We're home to a number of Fortune 500 firms, and we're ranked near the top 10 globally in metropolitan GDP. Next slide, please. So when you think about transportation funding basics, really looking at revenue, we divide it into 3 buckets. So our first is what we call system revenue. These are things like your gas taxes, vehicle registration fees, and other federal sources. So anything that you would get through the U.S. Department of Transportation, which then flows through TxDOT and to our region, or if you have discretionary grants, which I'll get into in a moment, those come straight from the DOT. Then we have facility revenue. So this is stuff, as the name implies, it's tied to particular roadway or transit facilities. This is toll roads, managed lanes, and fares that you pay to use public transportation. And then finally, we have local revenue, which all of you are very familiar with. It's your sales tax, your bond programs. Some cities in the region levy impact fees, property taxes, and then value capture mechanisms like tax increment finance, TERS, et cetera. Next slide. So some funding emphasis areas. This at a high level is what we're looking to fund. It is by no means exhaustive. And each team at the Council of Governments has, we have multiple program areas, and they each have their set of priorities that they're looking for. But at a high level, we're looking to address our region's air quality because we are in non-attainment for the pollutant ozone. We're looking to address safety issues, especially areas with high rates of fatal crashes or incapacitating crashes. That's both vehicular and pedestrian. We're looking to implement the regional VeloWeb. We're looking for projects that provide congestion relief, especially for regionally significant arterials. And then, of course, we're always looking for improvements to our transit system. And in recent years, we've really been honing in on looking at connected vehicle and automated vehicle technologies and how that can be implemented into existing transportation infrastructure. We are one of the only, if not the only, MPO in the country that has a pretty robust automated vehicle program and dedicated staff just for that purpose. Next slide. So your traditional funding options, we divide this into 2 camps. One is your federal or state funding. As our director, Michael Morris, always says, the good news is you have federal funds. The bad news is you have federal funds. That's because there are a lot of strings attached, a lot of administrative processes that have to be followed, a lot of things like your NEPA clearance for environmental clearance that you have to go through, things like that. And all of those processes contribute to timing challenges. As we're all painfully aware, there are insufficient funding available to meet all of the needs that we have as a region. And finally, federal funding requires a minimum of a 20% match, or as Amy will talk about in the policy bundle program, if you have transportation development credits available to your agency, those can be used in lieu of a cash match. And then again, y'all are all familiar with local funding, a lot fewer strings. There's the potential for faster implementation. I'll touch on why here in a little bit as compared to federal. And then again, there's unfortunately insufficient funding available to fund all of our needs. Next slide. So just wanted to briefly talk about our upcoming project selection that is actually going to our technical committee tomorrow. We're going to be proposing over $500 million of funding for various projects across these categories. We've been collecting funding requests from around the region for probably 2 years now, and we took the time late last year to evaluate those, and those proposals will be going out tomorrow for consideration. So I'll touch on this a little bit in a moment, but one thing that a lot of people ask is, hey, when's your next funding opportunity? We don't have, with the exception of a few teams, like I know Travis and Sean and their team do transportation alternatives, calls for projects periodically. For a lot of our funds, we don't really do that. So we don't have a set schedule. So our suggestion is to always, if you have a project request, just send it to us when you have it, and we inventory those and we'll periodically review them. Next slide, please. So the other opportunity that's really become common in recent years under the Biden administration is your discretionary funding grants. These have been around for a decade or more, back to when Tiger was around. But with each administration that comes in, they put their label, they rename them or phase some programs out, add some new ones. And with the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act a couple of years ago, that's also the same thing as the bipartisan infrastructure law. They've really expanded the opportunities for discretionary grants directly from DOT. So I've put a few examples here. This definitely isn't exhaustive either. I'd need several slides to put all of them on there. So I would encourage you to visit this web link, or Jeff Neal, who some of you may know on our staff, is our federal grant guru. He is always making presentations to STEC and RTC about potential opportunities that are out there. So a couple here that are either open or have recently been closed and or will be opening again soon are the RAISE program, which is due at the end of February. You have the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods program. You have the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant program and the Safe Streets and Roads for All. All of these, again, are things that may or are open soon. Next slide, please. So some points to consider. We always tell everybody you don't need to be the experts in funding options. That's what my team and I get paid to do. We often get people saying, hey, we saw this new funding source is available. How do we get that? And what we always say is, if you have a project request, send it to us and we'll do the work to pair it to the best and most eligible source of funds if there are some available. That's our focus, is to find solutions to transportation problems. So we're happy to help do that. I touched on it a moment ago of what types of things we're looking to fund. In general, we are looking to fund the mobility plan or the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So when you're thinking of projects to submit, keep that in mind. For example, we're more interested in roadway projects of regional significance, which we hear that a lot from people. Oh, of course, my project is regionally significant for whatever reason. And what we're really referring to is in the MTP, there is a listing of regionally significant arterials that we are looking to fund over the next 20 years. So as I'll allude to in a moment, it will be important that you engage the MTP team here at COG to make sure your proposed improvements in your thoroughfare plans are accounted for. Because if they are not in the MTP, then they cannot be selected for inclusion in the TIP. Some projects like signals, we're obviously not going to list 7,000 or however many signals that need to be updated in the mobility plan. So we have programs that talk about things like that. So if your project is something like that, we're looking for you to tell us how it would further the goals in that mobility plan. So when you're trying to find money, research your options, whether that's contacting me or my team about funds available through us at the Council of Governments, or looking for USDOT information on their discretionary grants. Explain your need, make sure you're tailoring it to either, as I just said, the things that we're looking for as a region, or if the Department of Transportation has a NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity. They will lay out in there what all they're looking for. So that will be pretty self-explanatory what they're looking for each grant that they are releasing. And I'll touch on this in a moment, but explain the funding you're bringing to the table. What I mean by that is, in addition to the required match for any federal funds that are awarded, some cities opt to pay for the pre-construction phases themselves instead of seeking federal funding for that. And that has impacts on the timing and things like that that I'll touch on briefly. Next slide, please. So wanted to talk about a couple of obstacles or mistakes that we see when people are asking for funding and once funding is awarded, trying to get those projects implemented. First and foremost, we see a lot of requests that are way too late in the process. We'll get requests and someone says, hey, we have this project that we want to start construction on in a year. That's usually the first question we ask is, okay, when are you trying to go to construction? They'll tell us, oh, next year. And our immediate reaction is going to be, that's not possible. As Charlie will allude to here in a moment in his presentation, there are quite a few processes that have to be adhered to in order to even get the project into the TIP and get a funding agreement with TxDOT. That can take up to a year, if not longer. And that's assuming we approve your project like the day after we get the request, which obviously wouldn't happen. So you're looking, it could be 2 to 3 years before you even get funding. So if it's something of your elected officials are really pushing for, federal funds may not be the way to go. Project readiness, we see a lot of project schedules that are unachievable for some of the reasons I've mentioned, accounting for the federal process, whether that's NEPA clearance or the procurement process for engineering consultants, whatever the case may be, Buy America, things like that. We have an entire workshop we've done on things like that. I could be here talking all day to you about that. Staff turnover, I know we all know that that's just part of the game in our line of work, but we do see a fair amount of times that projects that have been funded will slip through the cracks when there's turnover. So that's something that you should bear in mind if you do have a federally funded project. And finally, waiting for TxDOT to contact you about your project. If you are awarded funds, you have to reach out to TxDOT to initiate your project agreement. They are not responsible for doing that, and they are not responsible for following up with you constantly about getting your plan sets or your environmental documentation submitted. We see a lot of projects that will just sit there for months because folks have thought, oh, well, I'm just waiting on TxDOT to contact me about our project. So we're really trying to drive that point home. Next slide, please. So, okay, local agency funding and leading the pre-construction activities. I talked about a moment ago. We've unofficially coined this the Denton County model because they have been doing it for decades. There are some advantages to that, which include getting projects shovel ready, which especially when you're looking at federal discretionary grants, makes them more competitive. And it's a lot easier to apply for those grants. And the reason being, oftentimes they'll release an opportunity and then you have maybe 2 months at most to put an application together. And for any of you that have written grant applications, it can be a lengthy process. So if you have projects ready to go, that's great. There's also an obligation time frame, which just means that you have to have the funding committed and have an agreement executed with DOT within, it's usually around 2 years after you're getting an award. So if you haven't even started designing the project, that likely isn't going to happen. So that's one incentive to get your projects moving. There are things like if you fund a project's engineering with federal funds, you have to go through a TxDOT process to procure a consultant. So again, that if you opt to locally fund it, then you can just follow whatever your city process is. That's just one of many examples that of things that you could do to optimize your schedule. Of course, there is a disadvantage to doing this, and that is that you cannot get reimbursement for work that's already been done with federal funds. Anything done before your funding agreement is executed is not eligible for reimbursement. So you are taking the risk on that, and there's no guarantee that your project will get selected for funding. So that's another risk to this model. Next slide, please. I'll briefly talk about this. So this is something we've been doing in recent years more of, and that's innovative financing. We're trying to identify non-federal funding sources because there are a lot of, as I mentioned, strings that come with federal funds, and there are certain things that we want to implement that may not be eligible for federal funds. A good example is we've done some of the sustainable development work that Sean alluded to with some of these non-federal sources in the past. It just makes it a lot easier to avoid that process. So the example I really want to touch on is Irving Boulevard. So probably 5 years ago now, I think, COG and the RTC executed an agreement with the city of Irving. And the partnership was that the RTC would fund a reconstruction of Irving Boulevard to make it more context sensitive up front. And then Irving, over a period of, I think it's 10 years, is going to pay the RTC back 100% of the funding contribution amount with tax increment finance revenues over time. So we, as the council of governments, are taking the risk that the infrastructure improvements are going to spur that incremental increase in tax revenue within the TIF district. We often propose this for project requests that we get that are more economic development in nature, as opposed to things that are providing a purely mobility or safety benefit. Next slide, please. So my last slide, how to plug into the process, monitor the STEC and RTC meetings. As I mentioned earlier, submit project ideas when they come up. Again, we don't have a set schedule. So if you have an idea, we can always take it. We may not be doing project selection in the immediate future, but we'll inventory it. And as I said, in our current project selection, we've been collecting those requests for, I'd say, 2 years, and we'll go back and look through everything and see what are things of regional interest that we want to propose. Make sure you engage with Amy and her colleagues on the MTP team to ensure that your projects, especially your larger roadway projects, are included in the plan. Again, if they are not, then we cannot select them for inclusion in the TIP because that is the most overarching requirement, that the TIP projects be consistent with what is laid out in the long range plan. Again, be ready to apply when funding programs are announced. DOT is always releasing them, and again, they are not giving us a whole lot of time. And then get your projects ready for construction for all the reasons that I stated a moment ago. And next slide should be the last one. Yeah. So if you have any questions today, happy to answer those at the end of this. If you think of any after, feel free to reach out to me. I encourage you to look at our TIP website. It's got a lot of resources. We've done an entire workshop for STEC that was like 2 hours long that has a lot of this information and then some. It really gets, Travis said that gets into the weeds, but I didn't even begin to get into the weeds. So we're always happy to answer any questions. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thanks, Brian. And I would encourage everybody to keep these slides in mind, share them with your fellow city staff members as sort of questions arise, because there's a lot of good insights here. And I will hone in on something Brian mentioned. Funding is always kind of available. Send us your request. I would say don't ask us, is funding available, but say we have a great project rather, and show us that project. And then we'll say, okay, we agree it's great. We're going to find funding. That's sort of how we work. And hopefully I did that explanation justice, Brian, but
yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
awesome. And now is a great time. If you've got a question for Brian, super good resource when it comes to these type of questions. So feel free to put a question in our chat box here. All right, so now after you've secured money from COG, we have to keep tracking that and possibly modify it and take care of that ongoing process, because sometimes it takes a few years or 10 to get things funded here. And so Charles here is going to talk about that process. I may have not described it accurately, but he'll give you more information. So Charles, take it away.
Yeah, well, no, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. Yeah, for sure. I'm Charles Marsh, member of the project programming team, along with Brian, primarily working on tip modifications. But yeah, you're going to very generally get into the project development process and what exactly is the transportation improvement program. So next slide. And so the Transportation Improvement Program, or as we oftentimes abbreviate it, the TIP, it's essentially a short-term planning document that lists out all the projects approved to receive funding over a 4-year window. You could kind of consider it sort of like a budget for the region of all the transportation activities, not too dissimilarly to like a city budget or a state budget. And there's really 2 types that we deal with. There's the TIP, which is really just the DFW region, and that gets funneled into the statewide transportation improvement program, which is the STIP, and ultimately what is used by the feds to review the projects. And so, as Travis hit on, this is a very kind of long process, and thankfully the TIP is kind of a milestone in that regard. It's kind of the final step of the whole federal planning process, and it's where we can really start to put boots to the ground, really start creating these agreements, and really starting to realize these projects and ultimately secure federal reimbursement. But generally, the main objective of the TIP is to just ensure that the region is financially constrained and that projects align with the visions and the goals outlined in the MTP. So next slide. And so the general process to developing and maintaining the TIP is we create a new TIP every 2 years out of those 4 years. And then we're able to do modifications to the current TIP every quarter. So types of changes that we can make each quarter are addition of newly approved projects that weren't originally included, changes to funding amounts, changes to the project schedule, scope, and limits. So we can update the listing as needed. The only downside to this process is it takes some time. So it takes usually about 6 total months to receive formal approval, 4 months to approve the change in the TIP, and then 2 additional months for the feds to review the change in the STIP. But ultimately, we have to make changes because otherwise, if there's any inaccurate project information, there could be significant delays in getting approval and ultimately receiving that federal reimbursement. So next slide. And then here's the general process for getting a project all the way through this long process. So first off, we want to start off the project initiation phase. Basically, just you come to us, provide your idea of what you're kind of thinking, and we can work with you guys to kind of iron out the details, figure out initial cost estimates, and also make sure that this is included in the project's included in the MTP. From there, as Brian said, we inventory all these project ideas, and as funding opportunities come up, we can competitively evaluate and score them and eventually select projects for funding. In which case, once a project is selected, we can actually program it into the TIP and the STIP. And so that is also where the MTP comes back into play, because ultimately projects have to be in the MTP before they can be included in the TIP and STIP. So really step 1 is the most important part of this entire process, and then seeing it all the way throughout. And so next slide. And so this is kind of the process. Once we're actually able to program the project in the TIP, we can actually start the pre-construction phase. So from there on, we can start developing and executing these agreements, going into engineering right away, utility acquisition, and then ultimately letting the project for construction. And so once that's done, we just basically just kind of make sure the project stays on schedule and then ultimately close it out for federal reimbursement. So next slide. And then this is just the general schedule, breaking down the timeline for once the project's actually selected by the RTC for funding. So again, it takes about 6 months. It could be up to upwards of 9 months, depending on the review process. But expect 6 to 9 months to actually add a project to the TIP and ultimately receive federal approval. And then the agreement process can also take an additional 6 to 9 months. Engineering, 6 to 24 months. Right-of-way acquisition, 12, 18, so on and so on. And so ultimately, you can expect the project from once it's selected to ultimately completed 54 to 96 months. But this is assuming that no hiccups, no significant delays in the project, no major changes. And if there are changes, unfortunately, we'd have to revise the TIP, which would take another 6 to 9 months for a review process. And then depending on the changes, may also have to develop new agreement process. So ultimately, any significant changes or delays could result in almost a year to a year and a half of delays. And so we really want to get projects in as accurately as possible the first time to avoid major changes, but that is an avenue we can take if needed. So next slide. And then same slide that Brian hit on, but really just wanted to reiterate some of the common mistakes we oftentimes see. So really asking for funding too late, ideally 3 to 4 years before the need for funding. This is just to give us time to really kind of iron out all the details and ensure that the project's included in the MTP and ready for funding opportunities as they arise. Project readiness, basically we want to make sure that there's no significant delays or changes that maybe come up. Basically, we want to we typically recommend approaching projects very conservatively. We can always advance projects. It's a little bit more difficult to delay timelines. So really understanding all the details that I hit on earlier about the federal process and the timelines and really kind of factoring that into your schedule. Again, staff turnover leading to loss of institutional knowledge. These are very long processes. I mean, 3 to 4 years before you need funding, asking for initiating the project. Another 54 to 96 months till all the way through construction. It's understandable and expected that staff turnovers to happen, and so really just kind of devising systems to minimize the loss of institutional knowledge when that occurs. And then, yeah, I mean, ultimately waiting for TxDOT to contact you about your project. The onus is on you to really kind of keep the ball moving throughout this long process. And so basically, once the project is in the TIP, just keep pushing that on and engaging throughout each step. But that is all I have. So you can go into the next slide. And there's my contact information. And if there's any questions or comments at this time, be happy to take them.
All right, thanks, Charles. A lot of good reminders in there, as you mentioned. Getting that timeline, thinking about that, keeping that in mind is super important because things don't turn on a dime here. So yeah, again, all these slides, just to address a comment in the chat, will be posted online. So that whole process that we just went through right here of describing how things work, that's a lot to absorb right now. It'll be available for your reference later. All right, so I'm going to keep us moving here and see if Amy is ready to share one of, I think, the most innovative aspects of our long-range plan that is even innovative for other regions in the country. And I know our local governments out there sometimes are able to jump on this process and take advantage of it, but I think we can get the word out to more, which hopefully today will help with. So I'll stop there, Amy, before I say too much, and let you tell the region about the policy bundle.
Okay, well, thank you, Travis. So my name is Amy Johnson. I work on the Metropolitan Transportation Plan team. So that's what everyone previously talked about, the mobility plan or the long range plan. So I won't talk about the plan in too much detail for this. I'm going to focus in on the policy bundle, which is a component of the plan. So next slide, please. So the quickest background, because I think others did really well in covering, what is the plan? But the plan is that long range view of things that goes out 20 years into the future. So every 4 years, we're required to do this plan. At least sometimes we go a little bit sooner just for project reasons or air quality conformity reasons. And really the plan helps to direct and guide investment. And the 3 critical pieces of the plan are programs, policies, and projects. And so we know that there are a lot of the goals in the plan that can't be solved by just infrastructure investment alone. So that's where the policy side really comes in. So next slide, please. So the policy bundle comes in, takes a subset of the policies of the plan, which there are just dozens of them included in the plan. And so 20 of those come out as a bundle. Those are priority items that really would benefit from regional implementation. And so this is a voluntary program. If local governments, cities, counties, transit authorities participate, advance some of the policies out of the plan, they get rewarded with transportation development credits. So the TDCs, and this is what is managed by the TIP team on Brian's side and Charles's side. But those TDCs came to us, maybe 10, 15 years ago as part of our toll road projects that we had done. The federal government at that time was incentivizing and gave the region a big pot of these that can function as not cash, but kind of like a coupon. So if you have the TDCs to apply to a project, it'll take away the local match that's required there. So next slide, this is kind of the key point of why you would want to apply for this then. By helping us, you also get these TDCs that would free up effectively local funds that you would have had to put on the local match. So then you'll have that cash to your name still to be able to use for other priorities, things that are going on in your jurisdiction. So, police and fire and, whatever else may be going on that might need benefit from that. So next slide, please. This program has been around since 2016, and we have had pretty good participation over the years. We saw excellent participation in 2020, and it's dropped off a little bit, still kind of on average there. Every year we go through and try to do process improvement and see how we can get the word out. So we're glad to be here to bring this to you today. Next slide, please. So we'll cover the application process. We don't have an active round right now, but this will give you a sense of what would come up for the next round in the future. Next slide, please. So the first thing is, am I eligible to apply for this? The eligible entity types, there are 5, or 6, sorry. There's cities, transit authorities. Those are who we have typically received the applications from in the past. Counties are also eligible, ISDs even. NTTA and TxDOT are eligible as well. On the next slide. So we had a couple of changes over the years. The plan is not a static document. Each update we do the policies will be updated. Sometimes priorities are shifted or changed. Some things move to the forefront of importance, and then some things, kind of go backwards a little bit. So there's a lot of shifting over time in the plan, and that kind of comes into the policy bundle. So right now we are beginning development of our next plan, Mobility 2050. And so through that process, we may see some changes to the policy list. We don't yet know how extensive those might be. But as of the last round, which was round 5, we had a new scoring system that worked out really well. So previously it was, if you implement one policy, you would submit your documentation, get certified. We would certify that application that those policies meet the criteria, and then you would get a point for that. Now you have a threshold, and you can qualify, and then on top of that, you'll get points for each policy. So it further prioritizes the policies, taking into consideration if they're some are more difficult and some are an easier lift. So we'll get into that on the next few slides. Next slide, please. So I mentioned there's a threshold to qualify. So if these are based on how many policies are available for each entity type to actually pick and choose and apply for. So for if you need 50% of the policies to qualify for the baseline points. So if you're a city, for example, you would need 10 out of the 20 as 50%. And then transit authorities. So since we have 11, it's an odd number. We kind of just round it to the benefit of the entity applying. So you'd need 5 policies and so on. Next slide. Once you qualify, then the points for each of those policies you applied for are tallied up on our end, and that's part of the scoring process. So that'll give you then how many points do you have kind of fits you into the tier. So this is also how we've always done this by population. So and the transit authorities have there's an analysis that we've done in the past to kind of be able to slot those. But it'll tell you then, I've chosen a lot of the really hard policies. I'm a small city, but I've gotten a lot of points. So you can actually get, bumped up a tier and get more TDCs that way. Large cities, usually have a lot of documentation, a lot of things going on. So, those get coupled with the larger land area and just the potential for more projects and things to come through. On the next slide. So the rules, these are the high level overview here. There's one application accepted per entity on this. So you do have to coordinate with your, amongst your different departments in your jurisdiction or your entity. That way, if there's maybe one entity is hoping to use them, maybe they apply, or maybe somebody else is better for coordinating it and they'll get used wherever. But you'll have to coordinate that on your end. And then if you've applied in the past, you still need to apply each round. So documentation has to be resubmitted. Even if it's the same documentation, it may still count. So it has to be submitted again. And that is because, like I said, the mobility plan does see some changes over time. And so some of the documentation will change, or some of the policies may change. And then if you're eligible and you're awarded the TDCs, you would have 2 years to use those. And if they're not used in that time, they get thrown back in the regional pot. And then you can always reapply. So you can, keep those rolling by just applying each time. And then the last thing to note is that eligible projects that can utilize the TDCs, they have to be federal projects because it's a TDC. So it's a kind of the coupon for the federal local match. So they've got to be federal projects, and they have to be new federal projects. So it's something that does not already exist within the TIP. Next slide, please. So once we open a round and you're ready to apply, this is how it would work. So you would go on our website. We have some nice automation that we've set up now, so you don't have to wait for us to like email you things anymore. So you would request the application on our website, get a link in your email to be able to do that. And then that's a survey format that's online. So, you know, answering some questions, yes or no, and attaching documentation. In preparation, you can view the list of policies on the website just as a PDF, or we have this kind of newer application called the Policy Explorer. So if you open that up, it really gives you a lot of detail on the policies. So like, what is the policy? How many points potentially is it worth? What are the action items I need to do in order to qualify, and so on. And then once you've kind of reviewed and you know what you want to apply for, you gather up that documentation. There may be cases where you need something to go through the city council or get approved, go through commission or something like that. So you'd go through that process and then upload and attach everything, and then it comes to us and we start scoring. So next slide, please. So these are the policies that are from the most recent round, and on here are highlighted any of the new policies that were included, and then bold ones are just where we saw some updates to those. So there are 20 different options there essentially, and then each of those may have, you know, one or more options for what qualifies on the documentation. So really quite a lot of options of things you can do. And these are really just, you know, broad ranging, but you have things like stormwater management in there. Equity is a newer one that was added. And then on the next slide, we have the last 10 listed out. There's so many, they fit on 2 slides. But some of the ones that might be of interest to this group might be the ones in our sustainable development category. So that would be like context sensitive complete streets, the street connectivity, land use, parking management, access to schools and school siting. So there are many different options to choose from in there. Next slide, please. So back to the Policy Explorer, if you check that out on our website, which is nctcog.org/policy bundle, you'll notice there are some icons now where for each policy, it'll tell you what's a required element, like what's required to qualify for the policy. There might be additional items. So once you do the required element, you can actually add on like bonus items to get more points. Or there may be some policies where it doesn't matter which option you choose. You can choose any of them and they will give you the number of points indicated. So next slide, please. Just as an example, to show you what it looks like when you click into the Policy Explorer. For the land use strategies, when you open that one up, it'll show you the required documentation. So if you submit your documents that include all those elements, and that'll give you the 3 points, for example. Parking management, just to show, has like the 2 bonus options. So you can do the required element and leave it there, or you can try to increase it by another couple points. On the next slide. So this is for the upcoming opportunities. We had changed this to a biennial program a couple of years ago, and we just had the last round approved by the RTC, Regional Transportation Council, last September. So in theory, we would have another round approved in 2025. So that would be our round opening. But because of our Mobility 2050 schedule, it's likely that will be pushed a year. So we'll just work through the details of that and just let everyone know through all of our channels what our schedule is going forward. If you're interested in getting these kind of updates on our website that I mentioned, you can sign up to receive emails and you'll be the first to know when a round of Policy Bundle opens up. All right, next slide. And this one is just my contact information, should you have any questions. And if I can't answer them, if they're specific to TDCs or whatever, I can connect you to the right person. So, yep.
Great, thanks, Amy. And definitely check out those, everyone out there, the links for some of those policies. It's always good to be aware of them before the things happen, so you can perhaps get your city, county, or other agency engaged in acting some of those policies. So Amy, feel free to stick around, and I want to again invite everyone on the meeting to give us some questions in the chat. Or if you're just joining us by audio, feel free to speak up now and let me know if you have any questions for our group. And just to kind of go over some of what we've already seen, Don Rains with Dallas said he might be sending us some project requests. So we always enjoy working with the city of Dallas, as we do frequently. So we look forward to that. And then I think we got a question from Brandy that's looking at sort of how do we prioritize when we have multiple project requests. And Charles mentioned that we look at the goals in our long-range transportation plan. That's the team that Amy leads. And then we kind of look at regional significance factors, and as well as technical review of projects. I will say, sometimes it's hard to know what is federally eligible. Just a heads up for anybody on the land use side, we can't give money to real estate developers. Everything's got to flow through a local government. So if that wasn't clear, that's always an important thing. We only award to local governments. So sometimes we get requests for things where there's like a construction manager at risk method of construction procurement. And again, that's kind of from state rules, I believe. And so that may kill the eligibility of even awarding funds. So there's a lot of technical things like that we got to check on because of all the federal red tape. So in addition to priorities such as what's advancing a goal in the MTP, there's a lot of technical boxes to check. But of course, don't take my word for it. Contact our TIP team for detailed questions. All right. Well, again, our speakers, we thank you, Brian, Charles, Amy, for taking time out of y'all's schedule to join our land use task force for this topic on how to have local governments best leverage engagement with us at the Council of Governments. And if you've got questions that you just can't think of now, feel free to shoot us an email, shoot our speakers an email, and we'll get you guys that feedback. And with that, we're going to move into announcements. So just a few quick announcements of significance coming up. So I think our first one, Sydney, is something I added to our slide deck here. You may have caught that Brian mentioned, the federal infrastructure laws moved up a bunch of money. And so the one opportunity that I've recently heard of that you've probably heard of before is federal loans from the U.S. Department of Transportation. Those take the form of TIFIA and RIF. And you can see those acronyms spelled out there. They've got a lot of money to loan to local governments. This really works in public-private partnerships. And if you're interested in transit-oriented development, they've recently increased the availability of funds, the applicability of funds for TOD using these federal loans. I think the big pitch here is that they are a lower interest rate than private capital. Now, of course, there are some strings because it's federal money. But if that sounds like something that would help a public-private partnership in an area you're working on, recommend checking out those resources from the Build America Bureau that I've got linked here. So that's something to know. Now, an announcement that's a little more timely, again, continuing with our theme of federal funds, is, and again, this was something was referenced in our discussion here, upcoming federal grant opportunities. Let's see, January, end of the month here, All Stations Accessibility Program. And so that's an FTA program most likely applicable to areas with transit service, fixed route transit service. For details, see that link. A program I'm very familiar with, and that I think many of you may know as other names like Tiger and Build, is the RAISE competitive grant program. And this is applicable to a broad variety of transportation projects. If it's 25 million or more, so generally bigger projects, that's one project area grant you could use. And those are due at the end of next month. So if you're not already engaged in that, you probably want to get started quickly. And then so the last one we've got listed here is the Safe Streets and Roads for All, also known as SS4A. And if I'm not mistaken, the City of Dallas was awarded some of this funding last year for MLK Boulevard. And there's also planning funds available through this program, I believe. So not just infrastructure projects. So if you want to address safety needs in your community, especially for pedestrians and cyclists, coordinated with your land use projects, this would be a great resource for that.
And Travis,
So there's some,
we have quite a few cities that have already won. So there is some precedent there. I know full well because we're in the process of adding them to the tip. There's like 20 cities in the region that got planning grants. So
and
like
do those
Travis
also have
said,
to be in our UPWP? I think so too, right?
I don't know about that, but definitely the tip.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, like Brian said, there's a good chance you could get funding through that. So check out that link. And I think our next announcement, I'm going to turn it over to Devia. Is that right?
Yes.
You here? Sweet.
Yeah. So yeah, we have some community schools and transportation announcements. First, we have walk, bike, and roll to school. So we have Bike and Roll to School Day coming up on May 8th. And then we have Walk and Roll to School Day coming up on October 9th. NCT COG will be providing safety-themed giveaways and hosting raffles for new bicycles. So stay tuned for more information about that. That'll be for both events. And please share our engagement survey. We have an engagement survey for schools that have not yet participated in Walk to School Day. So we'd like to get information on how we can best engage as wide a range of schools as possible. So if you have, kids who go to a school or you are in contact with any schools for your work, please try and share this survey as far and wide as possible so we can get the best information we can. And then we also have a crossing guard initiative. Our goal there is to provide assistance on crossing guard practices for schools, maximize safety for children crossing the road. We hosted a regional coordination meeting to update our stakeholders and also receive feedback. So came out of that was we created an updated survey to better inform us about crossing guard practices in the region. So please share that as well with your respective jurisdictions. We would love to have as many city representatives and city staff and ISD staff as possible to get the best representation and to best inform us about the range of crossing guard practices and any challenges so that we can address those with our research and our initiatives. So I'll put those URLs in the chat as well. So please try to share those as far and wide as possible.
Great. Thanks, Devia. Everyone mark your calendars. Those are great days to promote safe, active transportation. And last but not least, you've probably heard this. If not, you are hearing it now. American Plan Association has a program of awarding, nominating, and recognizing great places in Texas, and they are looking for nominations. So I know in North Texas, we have a lot of great streets, a lot of great neighborhoods, and great public spaces. If you have one of those in your community and want it to be recognized, then check out this opportunity. We've got the link here in this slide. We hope some of you nominate some of our great places in North Texas. So take advantage of that opportunity. And again, these slides will be shared after the meeting. And I believe wraps up our announcements. So mark your calendars, April 25th. That is our next land use coordinated task force. And if you have a topic you really want to see on April 25th, send us a note as soon as you can. We look forward to hearing that. And you can get the slides from this meeting at that link there. And with that, I will say thanks for attending, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Always feel free to reach out to us with any questions related to things you heard or saw today. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thanks.